Stokes is onside. Walcott!
Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it! Just a minute to play. That's stoppage time. Here's Letizia! Oh, better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white.
Hello and welcome. It is now episode 92 of the Saints FC podcast. And on the line with me, I have Tom Parker. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, really good. High spirits, John. How are you?
Good. I'm also in Saints-related high spirits, so that's good. That's better than last time when we were in Saints-related low spirits. And we're just having a little bit of a chat before we got started here, and we're both even drinking beer on this Wednesday evening as we're recording, and we're both having issues in protecting our beer from our wives. And we're having to drink it just so that we get a chance to drink it.
You're not fast, you're last in this house, John.
Yeah. Sophie kind of like, she's always like, you don't need to get any more beer. We're fine. And then, and then of course the beer gets drunk before I get to it. So anyway, not tonight. I'm just going to close the door so Sophie can't hear me upstairs talking about her on the podcast and about stealing beer.
Well, look, the worst thing, if they listen to it, which they say they do, then we'll be in trouble. And
yeah.
If not, we'll be fine.
Does Imo tell you that she listens to the podcast? I mean, I don't think Sophie's ever listened to a single episode of mine.
No, I have listened to it. I think when I was working away a lot more, I imagine it was a comfort. Now I'm at home all the time. It's probably the last thing.
She don't want to hear your voice again.
Yeah, all bloody day. But so she listened to in the past. Big Saints fan, obviously. So,
Oh, there we go. Well, big shout out to Soph and Imo. I don't expect you to be listening, but there we go. If you'd also like to give a shout out to someone who you know is not listening to the Saints FC podcast, of course, email us saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com and we'll endeavour to do our best. 2 wins to talk about, Tom, and a transfer market or a transfer window, which I think we ought to review. So that's quite a lot to kind of fit in. And I think we should start with our kind of very rare win at Burnley. Can you cast your eye back, Tom? Can you remember this one?
I can. Saturday night, 8 p.m, which for me is an unnatural time for a football match to be played. It's not God's law to be played at that time. When was the last time we got a result at Burnley? Was it like something horrendous? Like, was it 2007?
Yeah, I think it was quite a long time ago. Yeah.
A long time ago. Obviously, horrible first game of the season. But Burnley look a shadow of their former selves, don't they, John?
Well, I mean, it was an interesting one because I think it was Sky were covering the match and they had this stat on the Burnley bench where they had 2 defenders. I think they were both fullbacks who had a lot of appearances between them. And then every single other player on the bench didn't have a single Premier League appearance between them. I don't think Burnley even made a substitution throughout the entire game.
They didn't.
No.
They had 2, I think you're right, they had 2 fullbacks that had something like 280 Premier League games, and the rest were just children.
Yeah. And, they had all the injuries, didn't they? I mean, I was very relieved to see that Jay Rodriguez was not someone I like to see injured, but relieved that he was not available for the game against Southampton. And I think Sean Dyche was trying to make a point as well. And also the other thing which happened, which was so good for Saints, because Burnley are one of those teams that they can sit deep. They'll play long balls over the top and we'll just never get a sniff. But because we scored so early, it just put all the pressure on them. They had more possession than us in the end, which is not something you'd normally see in a... Southampton don't like having loads of possession, and we didn't have loads of possession in this one. You know, we let Burnley have more of it, which is rare and a treat. And ultimately, we won.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously it helped Burnley hugely depleted. I think, their two big centre-backs were out. Players that, like, I think, Ashley Barnes has now gone to Newcastle. He seems to score against us every single time. Was that Jack Hendrick, Ashley Barnes? And Chris Wood up front, who has a good record against Saints. But, yeah, I think we said many times before, Saints are much better without the ball and are much more comfortable not having the ball, perversely. And I think it was a great goal, John, wasn't it? And I think Saints have got something going on through Carl Walker-Peters, the right back.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this goal because I think Bednarek gives it to Carl Walker-Peters, and he really, he starts it all off in earnest. I think the attacking move starts from him, running towards goal. Armstrong does a fantastic kind of run down the right wing, which I think takes the Burnley defender with it, and he threads this beautiful through ball to Che Adams. And you got to say, Che Adams, great vision, really clear thinking to kind of run onto that and then pass it back to Ings, who scores the goal. A little bit fortunate, you could argue. Had like quite.
It was a weird finish, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think kind of the Burnley defender got to it, didn't he? And they kind of got to it about the same time, and it almost like he kicked it against Ings's foot, and then it kind of looped into the net. It
was weird because it looked like an own goal, didn't it? Because it was just a strange connection. But a great goal, and I think that is a furrow that the Saints are clearly going to plough this season, which is the incredibly talented Carl Walker-Peters. What a footballer he is! What a brilliant player the Saints have. Just making those clever runs, clever passes into the box. You saw him do it against Spurs, Ings' first goal there. And it was a beautiful pass. And John, I know I shared on our WhatsApp group a fascinating article about Che Adams, which I don't know if you read, John, but about Che Adams' decision making, and whilst his tendency to kind of lash at goal when he shoots, but everything he does in the run up to goals and how important he is in the build up to our play. And it was a brilliant, the easy thing for him to do would have been to try and score from that difficult angle, but it was a great spot to pick out Danny Ings.
Che Adams is an incredible football player when he's not trying to score goals. I think that's kind of what we're learning. And then as soon as he tries to score goals, I think he feels an immense sort of pressure upon himself, which makes him misfire. But I thought this pass, this whole build-up, Carl Walker-Peters, Che Adams were just absolutely brilliant. So, what else did it say in this article, Tom, that we need to be looking out for? Is it maybe catching we can that feeling, or?
Yeah, essentially it's that Che Adams is doing everything right, and that Che Adams is actually indispensable to Saints because he makes players around him better, and he's clearly the best foil for our most lethal striker in Danny Ings. But what they're essentially saying is he has a tendency to, if you look at how Danny Ings will almost pass the ball into the net, place it. You look at the goals last season against Norwich, against Watford, Bournemouth, where he sort of passes it into the back of the net, really. Che Adams has a tendency to do everything right until the very last second, at which point he kind of lashes it as hard as he can get. We saw that against Spurs with the first chance that Lloris saved, and he kind of, he just has a tendency to maybe try and leather it, but by leathering it, he loses control.
Yeah.
But if you look at his play in the totality of what he brings to Saints, then his running, his energy, and his, maybe you need a number two. Maybe when you've got a big name striker like Danny Ings, who's clearly one of the top boys of the league, maybe it's no shame being the kind of the assistant, the Robin to that Batman. I don't know.
I guess the it's probably okay as long as we don't need to rely on him to be Batman at any point. But I think with Che Adams, at the end of last season we saw that he can do it. He can score goals if he needs to, and I think he will score goals this season, but he does need to calm down in front of goal. I think that seems abundantly clear. But I agree, he seems like a really perfect fit for Danny Ings, and I am not even for 1 minute suggesting that we take Che Adams out of the side, because
definitely not.
If you watch the full game, not just focusing on the highlights, you can see how much work he does for Danny Ings. He creates space for Danny Ings. He creates space for all of our attacking moves. And I'm sure that Danny Ings gets more goals because of Che Adams' presence on the pitch. I think he looks more dangerous when Che Adams is on the pitch than when Che Adams is not on the pitch.
I'd agree with you 100%, John.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's his striking partner, and I think they've obviously got a very good relationship. And I thought the assist to the goal was perfect, wasn't it? It was exactly what we needed.
Yeah. So Saturday 8 p.m. Prime time television slot. This probably wasn't a prime time game, really, was it? Because other than the Saints' goal. I was really struggling to pick out anything else worth mentioning. I mean, there was Chris Wood's dive for a penalty, which is quite amusing, because Sean Dyche always claims that his players don't dive, but they do. And I thought McCarthy made a really good save from Burnley's left back, Taylor. Do you remember that one?
Yeah,
absolutely thundered.
Very smart save, wasn't it?
Yeah,
very smart save down to his right. And I guess that's the measure of a good goalkeeper, is when you don't have much to do, can you retain the concentration?
Yeah,
it was a really clever save, and I think we said this before. You can tell everything about what's happened on a pitch by the reaction of the players. I always think, and if you look at the reaction of the Burnley players, particularly Taylor, who hits it, he thinks it's a goal. He can't believe that McCarthy's got. Not only as well, credit due. Not only does McCarthy save it, he does exactly what he should do, which is pushes it further out wide.
Yeah.
It would have been quite easy to push that ball into the back of the 6-yard box. So, really important save. After having a bit of a nightmare against Tottenham, I think that was a real. I imagine it's a real confidence boost for McCarthy.
Yeah, and it's totally different game, isn't it? And I think we thought Vestergaard might come in. I thought that's probably the other thing worth mentioning is Burnley had 8 corners. They played lots of long balls. And Vestergaard, who looked so awful at Turf Moor at the start of last season, actually looked very, very assured in the lineup. I thought, and Ralph was proved right with his tactics to choose Vestergaard over Stevens, because we got the clean sheet. We limited them to only 2 shots on target in the entire game. And that was it. Job done. Very professional job, I thought, by Saints as well.
Yeah, and if you look, and this is my fact. This is Scott Winter tweeted it, but Yannick Vestergaard has played 6 games and hasn't conceded a goal. Saints have not conceded a goal. Well, he hasn't conceded a goal in the last 6 games he's played. So that's 2-0 Bournemouth, 3-0 Watford, 3-0 Sheffield United. Second half of the defeat at Palace, 1-0 versus Burnley, and 2-0 again. We'll go on to talk about West Brom. So, maybe we've sort of, Salisi coming into the squad, and maybe it's given Vestergaard a kick up the arse. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's doing well, and he did well against West Brom as well. So I think that's the perfect time to move on to this one. 2-0. A nearly perfect first half, I thought, other than we should have had more goals. But Saints were just so much better. In my opinion, Saints were so much better than West Brom throughout the vast majority of this game, but especially that first half. I felt like, we were totally all over them. We talked already on this podcast about how Saints don't like possession. This is another game where we had a lot of possession. We had to take the initiative, but we still found a way of doing it, and we created lots of chances. I think with 13 shots, 7 on target. It was good. It was a good performance all round. I was a little bit disappointed with Ryan Bertrand. I thought he could have scored, but again, talking about Kyle Walker-Peters, loads and loads of chances coming down that right hand side. I mean, what did you make of this one, Tom?
Yeah, we should have been probably. I mean, it had that. Being a Saints fan, your most common feeling is, how have we not scored? Oh, we've just conceded. I think is sort of a very standard life experience. But, you felt we should have been probably 3-0 up, at least half time. And I think, obviously, their goalkeeper was having a worldie. They looked terrible, didn't they?
Yeah.
We're going to be honest. They looked really, really poor. very little going forward and no bite in midfield. They look like they've got a good keeper, but yeah, fair play to Saints. Kept plugging away. Didn't get despondent. I thought Danny was very unlucky with that header. And then Musa, who I thought was, to be frank, I thought he was pretty awful. Apart from the goal. But you know, he did really well, didn't he? He didn't, you know, I think he's got a bit of a tendency to lash at the ball, but if you think he hit the post against Spurs with a much more measured shot, and then his little Cruyff turn, taking out a couple of defenders, and then just almost passing it to the back of the net with his left foot. I thought it was a really smart finish.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed that Cruyff turn. I counted 3 defenders and a goalkeeper that was sold the wrong way on that one, which it's one of those ones you just want to watch over and over again in slow motion and just have all the different angles of all the defenders. They all shift over, don't they, to his right, and he just turns around and then slots it into the net. And I guess that's the thing about Djenepo, isn't it? He is a player who, you know, you've rightly identified, didn't have an amazing game, but he does something that's really special and unique. I don't know. I think we need to talk about our transfer outs as well, and we'll also talk about kind of like maybe some of our transfer ins and why we might have chosen them. But yeah, I mean, great finish from Djenepo.
Yeah.
And then start the second half, you know, to West Brom looked like they were getting back into it without ever really looking threatening. Yeah,
they changed up in midfield, didn't they, a little bit? And then they just sort of started to get a toehold in the game. But again, a smart save from McCarthy from that deflection off Carl Walker-Peters.
Yeah.
You know, like it's concentration, which McCarthy maybe has lacked in the past. It's been a criticism of him, but doesn't need to make many saves in these games. But when he does, he gets it right. And you could see that. You could just imagine the story. If that had gone in, you could see Saints sort of stumbling to a 1-1 draw at home to a very poor West Brom team. But it kind of keeps us in the game. And then I think from that point on, the wind went out of West Brom's sails a little bit, and just Saints started to assert themselves and scored an unbelievable second goal, John.
I mean, it's very rare that Glenn Hoddle ever gushes over Saints on the commentary. But Glenn Hoddle liked a volley back in his day. And he was really, really impressed with Aurelio Romeo here. Obviously, all the Saints fans listening to this, of course, would have watched Romeo coming flying out of nowhere, channeling his inner Paolo Di Canio, shooting through the air and karate kicking the ball straight into the back of the net. It was an absolute wonder to behold. The first time he's managed to make it into the box all season long, and he scores with his first touch in the box.
That's not true, is it?
Yeah, that's true. The first touch in the opposition box. First goal in 50 games as well. That's one of the ones which they read out on the commentary, which you can believe because, you know, we've all seen Romeo shoot before. And then I thought what was probably most funny was James Ward-Prowse in the post-match interview saying he didn't know if Romeo was attempting a tackle or a volley with that. But I mean, it was great, a fantastic finich, and it's exactly what Saints needed at the time. You don't believe he got it?
I've watched it. No, I've watched it. I watched Match of the Day earlier, and I still can't actually. I've not actually seen any footage of him because the defender's so close to him. I still can't believe he actually connected, and I think maybe it was an own goal. I mean, it definitely wasn't. Of course it wasn't. But it was a brilliant strike. But John, talk about how good the build-up was. You know, Stuart Armstrong doing his right to left Stuart Armstrong thing, which causes chaos when he does it. Just sort of sauntering across the box, doesn't it? And he takes up position on the left.
Yeah, and I think opposition defenders are really worrying about Armstrong now as well. It's like Armstrong, I think, was instrumental in Danny Ings' goal against Burnley without even touching the ball, and it's it's again, he causes worry and distress, doesn't he, in opposition defenders, which is something that's so important. And but I just felt like this was a game where, I mean, how many times have we seen Saints before come against weaker opposition, dominate for a first half, not get as many goals ahead, concede goals, fall to ridiculous draws and then sometimes even losses, throwing away points from being in the lead. We used to bang on and on and on about Saints throwing away leads and losing games and drawing games, and the most points dropped from winning positions since the history of mankind, and all of this. And it just, all the players I thought came out of this with quite a lot of credit. Not so many amazing individual performances, but the team worked really well together as a unit. And
Ward-Prowse, Romeu are both excellent. Walker-Peters is a revelation, isn't he? I mean, he's just he's a good defender, but going forward, I mean, one of the things that struck me with Walker-Peters is how confident he is. If you look 2 or 3 occasions against West Brom, he kind of has 2 West Brom players on him, and he finds a way out, doesn't he? He finds a little bit of skill, and it gets him out of that situation, and also enables him to break the press. And I think he's given us just so much more of an attacking outlet. And he's also, to your point, he's sort of transformed Stuart Armstrong's game. I completely agree. Stuart Armstrong almost has a free role for Saints, doesn't he? He just kind of pops up where he wants.
Just because Kyle Walker-Peters is proving so effective in that position.
Yeah. It was a great goal. It was clever from Redmond, very, very astute from Armstrong, and a worldie from Romeu. And we just saw the game out quite comfortably. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I'm really pleased about it. I think it's a really professional job from the Saints. And I noticed kind of in Ralph's post-match interview, he was talking about his automatisms again, which is those like automatic things that the team do. It's those... I don't know if it is necessarily automatic, but it's the idea that Saints there'll be something that will trigger all of the players into a press or into a particular style of defending or a particular style of attacking. And he was talking about that as well, which I thought was really good. But one thing which I did pick up from his post-match interview, and I'm not sure if you picked this up, Tom, but he was talking about we need to be a good team, as in like working together, because other teams have such quality. And I don't think he was talking necessarily about West Brom per se, but more about the Premier League as a whole. Did you pick up this one? I thought that was quite interesting because it's almost been a little bit down on the players, but really focusing on that team thing. And I know he said something like that in the build-up game against Manchester City, is that they knew that they had to work together as a team and be lucky. And it's a funny thing to come out with after a game against West Brom, because you don't look in that West Brom squad and think that is littered with really talented players. I mean, yes, there are talented players in there, but I thought it was probably more of a comment on the Premier League in general, and having done 2 professional team jobs against opposition, he was just kind of, I think, kind of really focusing on that.
Well, he's right, isn't he? I mean, if you look, it's early still. Fulham look pretty poor. West Brom look pretty poor. Sheffield United, they're struggling. Even if you look at a team like Villa, look at the quality Villa have added in this transfer window in Barkley and Watkins. Most teams have a player that will definitely be able to hurt you. Yeah. And what Ralph said about Man City, of course, is absolutely right. Everyone has to play the best game of their lives and work harder than they've ever worked, and then you might get a result. But the quality of the league is such now that everyone has players that will hurt you. And I think also Ralph is probably just bringing the players a bit down to earth. After 2 wins, after 2 poor performances, and getting us ahead in the international break. And also we've got 2 very tough games coming up. And it probably, he needs the players to focus on, against Chelsea. They're going to have to work like they did against Man City really, really hard. They've got a wealth of attacking options. And I think, it's a recognition that for Saints, the win starts from the forwards, doesn't it, in terms of the pushing back and the press. I quite like it. I like Ralph sort of doesn't get carried away with things.
Yeah. And I guess kind of what's also quite interesting, so these 2 games were obviously both dead set as like the last on match of the day. But they're 2 kind of like professional jobs from Saints and 2 fixtures which didn't catch the eye and to results which didn't really catch the eye. It was Saints doing what you'd hope Saints would do as a fan, which is, get a professional job done. Is it worth us just talking about the general Premier League craziness? Because
nuts, isn't it?
It is mad, isn't it? So, I mean, I looked at that. The 5-2 against Spurs, I think, was a pretty mad game. But by all accounts, it's, not even in the top 5 mad games that we've had this season after 3/4 match days. And, we've got Villa coming up, I think, after Everton and Chelsea. But the idea of Villa going and beating Liverpool 7-2 is just nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Spurs doing what Spurs did to Man United in retrospect isn't actually that surprising when you look at how terrible Man United's defenders are and how off his peak David De Gea is. And also like just how good, how good is Son and how good are Kane. Between them, they're two of the best forwards in the world, aren't they? So they can tear people to shreds. The Villa game is just a weird freak, isn't it? Like it's a bit like the Newcastle game, with the Villa game where a bit like the Leicester game for Saints, where almost like everything Villa hit went in.
Yeah.
But Villa could have had more. What was it? Watkins hit the bar. Barkley arguably should have probably had 2 before he scored his first. So it's just a weird thing, and I don't know what is it, John? Is it the fact that there's no crowd, so forwards are taking their time? Is it just that no one's fit? Is it no one's prepared? What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. I mean, certainly these results have had a bit of a pre-season about them, and I think watching Saints, certainly those two, the first 3 fixtures of the season, I don't think we were anywhere near approaching full fitness. The team wasn't clicking. Lots of the players looked off the pace. Tactically, we weren't able to make it, adapt to things. And it did have that sort of meaningless, not that feel of a meaningless, friendly, where it doesn't matter and you kind of let go and whatever. It doesn't, it doesn't matter, you carry on. But, is it going to be something that we're going to see continue into the rest of the season? In some ways, and I hate for being this person, but maybe Saints going out of the League Cup will leave us in a really good position for the league. Because if you take a team like Tottenham, for example, they're playing 3 times a week at the moment, and we're playing once a week.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
Yeah, it does give us a good chance, and it means that we don't. I mean, I always hate it when Man United fans or Chelsea fans or Tottenham fans start complaining about the amount of games they've got. It's like, well, yeah, but you've already hoovered up all of the talent anyway. Like, just deal with it. That's not, is Southampton going to feel sorry for Liverpool because they've got a lot of fixtures? Well, absolutely not, because there's a lot of people on that Liverpool bench who Southampton would absolutely be delighted to get their hands on. So I don't take that as an excuse, but I wonder if it might just kind of play into our hands a little bit in the Premier League. And if we can focus on the Premier League, get ourselves into a really good position, get clicking, then I'd still like us to have a really good go at the FA Cup. But it could work out. And perhaps that will have an effect on the league this season. We will continue to see lots of madness.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if we look, Saints would have played, 2 more games already this season if they'd have beaten, what, is that right? Brentford. Or just 1?
Yeah.
They'd have beaten Brentford, they would have played 2, they played 2 because Brentford have played 2 more games in the League Cup.
Yeah.
So, if you think about it like that, we've got a very threadbare squad, haven't we?
Yeah.
A very threadbare squad. And do we really think that we could have done that? Do we really think we could have pulled it off and then gone to Burnley and got results? I don't know. I mean, you're right. I mean, it maybe Saints were willing. I can't believe they threw the game. I don't think they did throw the game, but maybe in their grand scheme of priorities, that tournament wasn't it. But yeah, I think it does. It's better for Saints ultimately in the long run because, as you say, these games are going to start piling up, aren't they? It's already a short season.
Yeah. I'm kind of quite excited about that. The other thing as well, which I think we need to touch on, and which feeds into this conversation, is that thin squad with cases of COVID on the rise again. And we've already seen one of the players that we've been gushing about over this episode, Stuart Armstrong, has been has had a positive test for COVID. So also the other thing is, because he's been tested out on international duty, he's going to be in isolation in Scotland for 2 weeks, which is probably not ideal. I think if you catch it, you probably want to be home and not be
Winchester.
Yeah, not be the kind of in Scotland or in I suppose with that Scottish MP in London. So, I'm sure Stuart Armstrong will be staying in Scotland. I doubt we're going to spot him on a train coming back. And then I think kind of what's interesting about this is then it does show you the importance of having that depth in the squad. And you mentioned to me earlier that you thought, well, looks like Theo Walcott's going to get a game probably quicker than he thought he would. Which is because Stuart Armstrong's going to have to be off for at least 2 weeks. That's if he has no symptoms. And then if he does have symptoms, what's going to be the lasting effect on that? We know it affects the upper respiratory tract, which could have quite a big impact, I think, on a professional athlete's ability to get the oxygen to their lungs and run around a football pitch. So the Premier League craziness, one of the things that led to Liverpool not having a great game against Aston Villa was probably the fact that Mane was off with a similar thing. And this is going to get more and more common as the winter progresses, I think.
Yeah, and you're right, John. It's definitely not getting any better, is it? And yeah, tonight, obviously, our favourite Saints player, probably between us, I'd say, Stuart Armstrong, testing positive. I was maybe a bit flippant in our WhatsApp group earlier. I said, it means he'll be fine for Chelsea, he won't get injured. But your brother rightly pointed out, that he's probably not going to be back for Chelsea. And he's an integral part of what we do. And, I think it's 3 of the Scotland team have tested positive tonight. So, yeah, you're right, John. These additions, if we look at it just like that, going out of the cup and the additions to the squad we've made are going to be even more important.
Yeah. Well, should we now move on to the transfer market, the transfer window? Because we've had an interesting certainly last couple of days, which was quite exciting, because Saints, we don't normally have particularly exciting transfer windows unless you talk about kind of excitement in the kind of heavily anxiety filled and hugely disappointing form of excitement. But I think it's been quite a good transfer window in terms of we've got 4 players in. Kyle Walker-Peters requires no introduction. He's done really well for Saints, and making his loan permanent, I think, was really high on the priority list. We've already seen him perform really well this season. But we've got Ibrahima Diallo, bought from Stade Brest, which is a Ligue 1 side. And
little fact, John, you asked for facts about Ibrahima Diallo.
Yeah.
Of the players who attempted more than 40 dribbles in Ligue 1 at the beginning of last season, only one has a better, I don't know who it is, only one has a better success rate than Diallo, who completed 79.6%.
Oh, that's quite interesting, because I didn't really realise that was the game. Yeah, that was his game. So obviously, when you read about these players, I didn't know anything about Ibrahima Diallo before Saints had the interest kind of talked about. He is only 21 years old. He's French citizen, born in Tours, in France. And the thing which I suppose I was most excited about is you look at these young players and then you try and work out, well, what type of a player are they? And the player that he gets compared to the most is not his brother, who plays for PSG, who you thought might be quite an obvious one, but actually to N'Golo Kante of erstwhile Chelsea and Leicester City championship winning season fame. So if he's an N'Golo Kante, I think that's really, really good news for Saints. It's probably not great news for Oriol Romeo. He's going to have to, be scoring quite a few more volleys, I think, if he's going to keep someone of N'Golo Kante stature at the side. And I can see why the comparisons are there. The guys look quite similar. They're similar in their stature. They're both French. That's the similar position that they play.
Yeah.
Similar sort of job that they're asked to do. But yeah, the dribbling part is quite an interesting part because it probably shows that there's more of an attacking element to his game that I haven't yet read about or discovered. So
yeah, I think it was a really great window for Saints. I really do. I think it was a really good window because I think they clearly got, They clearly got, Walker Peters is someone they obviously desperately wanted, and is an excellent player. That's a great signing. Diallo, again, John, I can't pretend to know any more than you, but he's clearly very highly regarded, linked to Arsenal, Leicester, Monaco, ends up at Saints. Saints haven't broken the bank to get him, but fits the sort of Ralph mould in terms of young, can learn, could be sold on at some point in the future for big money. And then again, Salisu, who seems to be a similar type of player, but obviously very, very well regarded, much sought after, and has chosen to come to States. And obviously we'll go on to talk about the big name signing, I guess. But I thought it was a really good sign, a really good window for Saints. I think we have to be pragmatic about, players that we're going to sign. And if you look, Watkins, yes, he got a hat-trick for Villa against Liverpool, but he cost £28 million for a bloke who's never scored a Premier League goal. And he might go on to be brilliant, but, that's how much, the best Championship players are going to cost now.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it?
Saints aren't going to spend that money.
You compare that to Che Adams, who is probably the Ollie Watkins equivalent, and Ollie Watkins is even more expensive than that.
Yeah, what was Shea, like 12 or something?
Yeah.
14? I don't know. So we're going to, Saints are going to have to use their scouting network to find these off the beaten track players that, we're not going to sign a James Rodriguez, are we? It's just not going to happen.
No matter how much I'd like it. And that's the thing, isn't it? It was like with the Gareth Bale thing, he clearly wanted to come back in England and have a bit of nostalgia. But we were just never going to get anywhere near him, were we, with that? So, before we get on to the one which I think we all want to talk about, because it gives us a chance to do some reminiscing, do we also need to talk about some of our outs as well? So, after we sold Virgil van Dijk for, 75-80 million quid to Liverpool, we spent the money on a group of players, which hasn't really worked out particularly well. And I'll just go through some of those players, so like Guido Carrillo, Wesley Hoyt, Mario Lamina, Buffal. I can't remember if he was bought with the Virgil van Dijk money or not, if maybe he was a little bit earlier than that. But there's a lot of kind of bad signings who've been on a lot of money at Southampton, and we've shifted the lot of them.
Yeah, it was a terrible. I think again, you're too kind. They were terrible signings, weren't they? To a man, they're awful players that we signed, and not because they're bad players, but they're just obviously completely unsuitable for Saints. I thought it was quite interesting, the article today on The Athletic, where Dan Sheldon sort of talked about Buffal and said that there's no one questioning at the club Buffal's talent, but it's more about what he brings to the unit. And we all saw with Buffal, the guy had more talent, natural talent, probably than any Saints player, probably since Matty. In terms of like what he could do with the ball, but just didn't have the application. And I think we signed a lot of players. I noticed Lamina wasn't even on the bench for Fulham. Hoyt has been sort of passed around, like an unwanted, like an unwanted gift at Christmas, and it's just, such poor players and such poor choices. And I just think what Saints seem to have done now is almost gone back to the older way of recruitment. You'd hope, You didn't mention Elyounoussi there either, John. I don't think, did you?
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about him.
But I think it was a great window for Saints, not only because of the players they brought in, but because they've shifted so much of that deadwood. And that deadwood is what we're looking at there with Lamina, Hoyt, between those two. What do you reckon that is? Like 160 grand a week in wages, at least?
Yeah, probably. Which, I mean,
70 grand a week wages.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when people talk about football players as assets, and I had an accountant kind of explaining to me that players aren't considered assets on a club's like balance sheet; they're considered liabilities. And I think you can see that with that group of players that we've just talked about, is that the asset was the 80 million quid that we got from selling Virgil van Dijk. What we managed to do is turn 80 million pounds into a huge liability of a group of players that didn't fit with Southampton. Nobody else anywhere in Europe seemed to be particularly interested in having them, and certainly nobody else was willing to pay for them. And you look at kind of the Gareth Bale situation, where nobody can afford his wages, so he's kind of stuck at Real Madrid for all that time. And it's just the same here at Saints, isn't it? There were kind of like 4 players that were so overinflated that it's cost us money really to kind of get rid of them. I mean, I think writing off £19 million, I think it was, that we paid for Carrillo, is just crazy, isn't it? It's probably the worst bit of business Southampton have done.
Absolutely. I mean, John, it is the worst bit of business Saints will ever have done with Carrillo. I think I saw a stat at £33,000 a minute.
Yeah,
he cost. I was actually surprised it was that less. And that little. I would have thought it cost more per minute. I mean, he's gone for, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Elche.
Yeah.
Who are sort of perennially at the bottom end of the the Spanish league, and I'd love to know. Apparently, he's one of the better paid players at Saints. And he's not earning that money, but at Elche, but he's managed to sort of for 2 or 3 years get that Saints wages, which will have set him up for life. It just it's a mad. It was a terrible signing, the worst signing we'll ever make. And people involved should hang their head in shame, but all we can do is get rid of them. And apparently the fee we got from LJ didn't even cover the cost of cancelling his contract, like the administrative cost. So I wonder if they gave us like £1 in consideration.
Kind of like a peppercorn sort of
peppercorn thing, yeah. But ultimately, we have to look forward, and they're arguably not players that Ralph would have signed. And I think the fact that Lamina got nowhere near the first team, and Hoyt and Buffal didn't really get much of a sniff, kind of tells you probably a lot about the personality of these players.
Yeah, I think as well as basically what Saints have done is gone through a painful restructuring process with their playing squad, which shows as much that they're willing to allow Ralph to write off these players, get rid of them without just making money, despite that being kind of our whole business model, and moving on. So I think we talked about it before, Salisu and Diallo. Hopefully there will be players that we'll be talking about in the sort of Mane and Virgil van Dijk sort of terms in the future, rather than the Kevin Danso or the Elyounoussi types. And they very much fit with that Saints mould, I think, as does Kyle Walker-Peters in a way as well, like getting young players with lots of untapped potential and then trying to turn them into a greater force, potentially with looking to sell them in for a profit in the future. But then the most interesting bit of business, I think, in the transfer window, and certainly the bit which kind of like ticks all the nostalgia boxes and has got us all thinking of 14 years ago, is Theo Walcott on loan from Everton. And this is a transfer which I think has a lot of people bemused, but I think it has a lot of people smiling. How do you feel about this? What are your emotions thinking about Theo Walcott coming back to Saints?
I'm hyped. Like, I think it's a great signing. I think it's a brilliantly clever signing. I think it works on a number of levels. We've just spoken about wages. The very well informed Athletic talk about the Saints paying less than half of Theo Walcott's 110 grand a week wages, whatever it is. It's huge money, Everton. So if you think he's probably earning less than Carrillo was, so he doesn't, so the club remains net in profit still in terms of, outgoings every week on wages. And what a player to bring back. I don't think it is just a kind of nostalgia play, because I actually don't think there's any real room for that. I don't think Ralph does nostalgia. I almost think also it was so long ago that no one at the club was there when he was there. So I don't think he necessarily goes there. I think it's a really pragmatic, smart signing of a player that has kept himself incredibly fit, clearly wants to play, can play across. Saints play a front four. He can play across any position in that front four. He scored over 100 goals. He's much maligned, but he scored over 100 goals for Arsenal. He scored against Barcelona. He scored against the top teams in European football. He's got 47 caps for England, including he scored goals for England. He loves Saints. He wants to be there. Financially, it makes sense. We've got some very raw young players that will absolutely benefit from looking at the career someone like Theo Walcott has had and looking at how he maintains himself. I don't get it. There was some negativity. I just don't understand it. I mean, do we really think that, Gineppo started 10 games last season. Armstrong does get injured a fair bit and now has coronavirus. Redmond, with the sort of game that he plays, is liable to injury. We don't have a big squad. We look at, once you get rid of those guys, you're looking at Nathan Teller.
Yeah.
Who might be very talented, but, it's too early to say. And for me, this is a great signing. I don't understand the negativity. John, what do you think?
I've been poring over kind of Theo Walcott's stats, and what I think is kind of quite amazing, really, is he only played 23 times for Saints, and scored 5 goals, which is not bucket list, but I think when he burst onto the scene as a 16-year-old, if you were there for some of those games where he did have an impact, which he did in most of the games he played in, he's such a wonderful football player. And I think, from watching 16-year-old Theo Walcott and watching 16-year-old Gareth Bale, I thought Theo Walcott would go on to bigger things than Gareth Bale. I think he had more natural talent. He's had a career which I think probably didn't necessarily reach the heights that maybe people kind of hope, but I think at 16 he was so overhyped. There was such a lot of pressure to have on a 16-year-old's shoulders that you're right, over 100 Premier League goals, goals in some really important over 100 goals for Arsenal, lots of goals in Europe as well, European competition. He's had over 20 goals. Yep. He's had, I think, 8 goals for England in those international appearances, including a hat-trick. And actually, he's not going to look back on his career and think, oh, what a disaster career I've had. He's going to look back on it and think of it very fondly. And I think you're right. If in that position we'd chosen, let's not beat around the bush. I think, there were other players that Saints wanted before, which we've missed out on. And we haven't got the Diallo or Salisu equivalent, which is that young player with buckets of potential. But that's what Gineppo is. So, and also I think, you look at Salisu and you look at Diallo, and, with Diallo and saying he's supposed to be the new N'Golo Kante. With Salisu, they're saying, hopefully he can replicate some of the things that Virgil van Dijk would do. You don't need to do that with Theo Walcott. Theo Walcott is Theo Walcott. You know what you're getting. And that's quite exciting for Saints. We don't often get a player who is famous in their own right for being the sort of football player that they are. I'm excited. I'm excited in seeing what he can do on the pitch. I think he offers us something different. I think he's he comes across as a really good professional. I think he'll very happily try and slot into what Ralph is doing. And it's good to bring someone in who has, I don't know, probably 350 Premier League appearances to his name. That's a lot of experience. That's a lot to draw on.
Yeah, and if you the deal makes total sense. He's also a free agent at the end of this season. So say he does do well.
Yeah.
There's a chance Saints could keep him. If he doesn't do well, by my terrible numbers, it's an investment of about £2 million for Saints.
Yeah.
If his contract runs out at the end of June, which of course is a huge amount of money, but in the world of Premier League football, it's not. It's one place in the league. So I think it's a great move. I think it's a feel-good factor. It's a shame the fans won't be there to see him back on the pitch. But I think he'll be raring to go, and I think he'll have a point to prove, and I think he'll lift the entire club. What's not to love? It's a great signing. My only disappointment is they didn't use the foray Walcott from Peep Show, Jake in the video, but that's something I'll have to live with. But yeah, I just don't get the negativity, John. I think there's a certain sort of section of Saints fans that are just, it's a certain section of people that are just never really happy with stuff, and I think this is a really astute signing for Saints.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled about it, and let's go to Gary, who's emailed in. Gary Seward, guys, like many, I'm absolutely elated at the return of Theo Walcott at our fair club. The passion he has to play for us is obvious in his interviews. I do wonder what would have been the fans' reaction had Adam Lallana returned, former academy graduate, left to play for one of the top six. Bit more of an acrimonious departure for Adam, though. What about if the Ox came back, or dare I say, /dream it, Gareth Bale? We don't want to be an academy graveyard, but if they can still do a job, inspire the young lads, and we get value for money, why not? Adds to the romanticism of football too. Not had a fairy tale story since Ricky left to complete his journey at his hometown club. Might have been a good one to mull over on the latest pod. Well, here we are. That's what we're doing, Gary. If you have time, of course. So it is an interesting point, and I think there's a lot of warm feeling towards Theo Walcott. I think overwhelmingly the reaction has been positive. There are always the kind of naysayers out there. I think it probably would have been different with Adam Lallana, but I don't know. I wouldn't have been against him coming back. I think Adam Lallana's good.
But I think it's a different financial proposition, isn't it? Because Lallana, I think, has been given a 3-year contract at Bournemouth.
Yeah.
On probably the same money that Walcott was on at Everton, so north of $100,000 a week.
Yeah.
So so that's back of a fag packet without any signing on bonus or any bonuses. That's a guaranteed £15 million heading Alan Lallana's way.
Yeah.
Over 3 years, which is a lot for a player. He hasn't played 90 minutes in the Premier League since 2017. I think it's a different proposition for me. And also, you have to think about the manner in which they left. Like, Walcott left with everyone's best intentions, but everyone's best wishes. Lallana left in a kind of fit of pique. So, yeah, I don't think they're comparable.
No. What about Oxlade-Chamberlain? And I mean, I think everyone would take Gareth Bale in a heartbeat because he's probably still one of the best football players in the world. But Oxlade-Chamberlain is an interesting one. What's he doing at Liverpool at the moment? Because I haven't seen him make an appearance, but I think he did have quite a few appearances last season. So I wonder if he maybe if he's injured.
Yeah, I've not seen him this season at all. But he played a fair number of games, didn't he, last year? I mean, looking here, appeared in 30 Premier League games last season.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty good. I mean, I imagine most of those off the bench. But, again, to the point about wages, these guys don't take pay cuts.
No.
And, Saints would have to break the bank to sign Oxlade-Chamberlain, who incredibly is still only 27 years old. So I don't know. I mean, for me, this is the smart transfer, but absolutely, we'd all take Oxlade-Chamberlain back, and we definitely would take Gareth Bale.
Yeah. Interesting fact, I saw the last live game of football I saw was Tavistock versus Gosport, and Oxlade-Chamberlain, Alex's brother, was playing in that game.
Is he any good? Can we get him in? Can he do a job?
I don't think he'd do a job for us, I'm afraid. I've got one more email to read out, Tom. It's from a chap called Scott Gorman. And Scott, I do like the picture that you've got as your kind of email profile. Very professional. He's to describe Scott, he looks like, nice kind of good, smiley, rugged-looking man, sharp haircut with a light blue shirt and a kind of orangey golden tie. He's looking great here. So he says, "Hello, gentlemen. First of all, thank you for taking the time to do what you do." You're welcome, Scott. Living in the States, I find that your podcast is my bridge to Southampton supporters and really enhances my experience as a fan. Lovely for you to say so, Scott. And my question is, with Nathan Redmond missing time, is it finally time we give Josh Sims a look, even if only off the bench? And if not, what turn of events would need to take place for him to finally factor in? The age-old Josh Sims question is coming back, Tom. What do we think?
Well, when I said earlier that Stuart Armstrong was our favourite Saints player, I think before Stuart Armstrong there was Josh Sims. We love Josh Sims on this podcast. We think I don't know what he is he? He's not quite a winger, he's not quite a central midfielder, he's definitely not a forward, but he's someone who's always looked great for Saints and has made the difference in the few games he's played. He hasn't even been given a squad number, has he?
No.
And he was playing for the B team the other night. I've got a feeling that Josh Sims will be, we've kept a lot of players for a number of years that aren't getting anywhere near the first team. And I mean, like Sam McQueen, Jake Hesker, and sadly now I think you probably have to put Josh Sims in that category. I just don't think he's getting anywhere near that squad.
Yeah,
I think he'll be a very good footballer for someone else, but just clearly Ralph doesn't rate him.
Yeah. It's a shame, isn't it? Because I think in all those sort of appearances he's had for Saints, he's been involved in some really important kind of build-up play. Not a big goal scorer necessarily, and perhaps that's what means that he's not getting the chance. But he's 23 years old. He probably needs to move on, and it pains me to say it. And I think you look at. Actually, Josh Sims looks an awful lot like Stuart Armstrong in some ways. If you look at their mugshots, had an interesting stint with Red Bull New York. I think that went pretty well. But
he does look like Stuart Armstrong. God, you're right, John.
Yeah, I think he probably. You're right. I think as much as it pains me to say it, I think he probably does need to move on, because if he's not been given a squad number. If we signed Theo Walcott, which is another player that fits into that, Nathan Teller's clearly ahead of him in the pecking order. I don't know that he's going to get a chance, is he?
No, and it's a weird one, isn't it? Because we don't know much about, and I don't mean to besmirch Nathan Teller, but we don't know much about Nathan Teller. But if you're looking for an impact player off the bench, you would have thought Josh Sims would be it. It's obviously just something hasn't worked out there, whether it's like a personality clash or whatever it is. It's weird because you think Josh Sims with his sort of high energy style would fit well into the pressing game that Ralph demands. I don't know what it is. I don't know if we'll ever find out. It's a very strange one.
Yeah. I think the other thing which also makes it more strange is the loan to New York Red Bull is they're a club that play a similar sort of style of football. So it made sense. Get him some practice playing that similar style of football. Then he can come back and immediately slot in. But it just hasn't happened. So I don't know. I think we're probably not going to see Josh Sims, I'm afraid, Scott Gorman. But, thank you for the email. And, who knows? Maybe we haven't seen the last of Josh Sims, but I kind of hope that we see him in a Southampton shirt again. Tom, not loads more time to talk about anything else. We've got an international break. England are playing against Wales tomorrow. James Ward-Prowse and Danny Ings are both back in the England squad.
Deservedly.
Yeah. I was kind of a bit surprised about James Ward-Prowse because I think his level of performance has perhaps dropped off a little bit, and I was very surprised that he didn't get in on the pitch in the game against Denmark. In the last round of international fixtures, but we'll see what happens there. See if either of them get a game. Hopefully, neither of them will get COVID like Stuart Armstrong has, and neither of them will get injured because even if they're not front and centre of Gareth Southgate's plans, though they are very much front and centre of Ralph Hasenhüttl's plans. And then after the international break, as you mentioned before, we have a pretty tough run of fixtures. So we've got Chelsea away. A game which we won last season 2-0. Everton at home, a game which I think was arguably our worst performance of the season last season, and that was against a poor Everton side. Now Everton are looking scintillatingly good. And it's a shame, isn't it, to not be at St Mary's and see... I quite like, to watch a player like James Rodriguez. I'd like to watch him live. And we're not going to get a chance to see that. We're not going to get a chance to see James Ward-Prowse versus James Rodriguez in the middle of the pitch at St Mary's, in person. But I think that'll be an interesting battle, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be a good game, Saints Everton. Obviously, Everton are kind of flying. It'd be good because there's lots of interesting battles on the pitch. Obviously, you've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Danny Ings. Both would fancy their chances of being number 2, Harry Kane. You'll have a real battle in midfield with Allen and James Ward-Prowse and Allen and Decore against Romeo. Yeah, interesting game. The Chelsea game is going to be really hard. But at the end of the day, you have to go and play these teams over the course of the season, and I'd rather go and play them after coming fresh off an international break after two wins and 2 clean sheets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll look forward to those. They're not for a little while, so I don't think we need to go into too much depth. Hopefully, listeners, you've enjoyed hearing the musings of me and Tom, and hopefully you're all as excited to see kind of the new Saints players through your television screen, unfortunately, instead of it live. But great that I think these players get a chance to kind of get in there and work with Ralph for a little bit before we have our next fixtures. And touch wood, we won't have any players coming back injured or COVIDed from international duty, and we'll get to see them kicking on. As always, if you do want to get in touch with the Saints FC podcast, you can do so, saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter if you prefer tweeting. And thanks to all of those of you that kind of email in and tweet us regularly. I think that's it from me, Tom.
Yeah, it's been a good show, John. I've enjoyed this.
Okay, great. Well, bye-bye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.